about that little guy.
What's going on, guys? So it's been a long time since we did anything with the El Camino, and the El Camino is starting to get some love. So a lot of things that we've done to it so far for upgrades is we fuel injected it, put a 4L80E 4-speed automatic electronically controlled transmission. We put the Holley controller for the 4L80E in there, and a host of other things. So we did things like a bucket seat interior, a nice center console off of Amazon. We did the head unit and the Holley dash, Nardo steering wheel. I mean, there's just been a whole bunch of stuff that we've been doing to this thing a lot lately. But one of the things we're going to be doing today, and let me close the hood here so you guys can see this a little better, is the dash. The dash is pretty shot. Actually, it's really shot. You can kind of see down in here, it's all crapped out. It's all cracked. It's just falling apart. So a good friend of mine had an El Camino, and that El Camino happened to have a really nice dash. Much better than my dash. It's only got a couple of small cracks, but everything in it is beautiful, comparatively speaking, to my dash. So what we're going to be doing today, let's go ahead and start ripping this dash out and see what we can get. So I figured while I was doing this dash, I would kind of bring you guys in here and let's talk a little bit about project cars and whatnot. Because I feel like I hear the same thing over and over again about project cars and how they never get done and they ultimately get sold and things never work out. And I think the internet has caused an unrealistic vision of what a project car should be, and most of all, what a project car should ultimately cost to build. And so I think a lot of people get in over their heads when trying to put together a project car, and it just becomes too much to the point where the car ultimately ends up getting sold, it gets parted out, it gets whatever before it's ever even finished. So I kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of an idea on how I built this car and the steps I went through and the processes I went through, and also to the cost of these things. Like, you know, let's talk about that first, is the cost. You have to be realistic when you're building a car, especially nowadays. You know, cars are not cheap. New cars are $60, $70, $80, $100,000. So naturally, the price of car parts goes up pretty significantly just because. And so you have to kind of take that into account and understand that, you know, the parts that you're using to build your project car are probably going to cost more than they did 30 years ago. So you have to start to get kind of resourceful when you're putting these things together. And so I'm going to kind of give you a rundown of how I put this car together and, you know, what it took to get this thing on the road and driving and reliable and all the other happy stuff that goes with that, because it wasn't cheap, and it really never is. I think that's a huge misconception that's out there in the world, is that you can build these things ultra cheap for next to no money, and that's just not the case. And so you have to be realistic, you know, and the way that I, you know, end up doing a lot of the stuff that I do is budgeting, you know, budgeting for the car, budgeting for the upgrades, budgeting for the repairs, all the other stuff that goes along with owning a vehicle that is going to also apply to your project vehicle. You know, not necessarily just a regular off-the-shelf vehicle that you can purchase from a dealership. So little backstory on this car. I found this car in a junkyard. A friend of mine said, hey, I have a buddy who's got this car. It's in a junkyard. It's got no glass in it. It's got no interior. It had some body work done on it that was done okay, not perfect. But it's available and it's cheap. And so when I, asked how cheap is cheap, he said $750 cheap, which to me is a pretty good deal. So I jumped all over it and went and bought the car. And I'll insert a picture of what the car looked like when I picked it up. But $750, and I actually got the guy to deliver it to me. And when I got it, you can see it in the picture, it's got a tarp wrapped around it, but it had no glass. It had no interior whatsoever other than a dashboard and a steering wheel, and obviously the dashboard's pretty jacked up because I'm replacing it. It had a V6 in it. Running condition was kind of unknown. Didn't know if it ran, didn't know if it didn't run. But I figured for the price, it was a halfway decent shell to start with. And I determined I could make it work. So I bought the car. And I put the car in the garage, and I just let it sit there until I figured out my plan for the car. Now, that's one of the most important things you can do with a project car. I found this car. I didn't have a plan to buy an El Camino. I'm actually a Mopar guy. But I always did like these El Caminos. And, the price was right. So I wanted to come up with a plan for the car. And that's extremely important. Because if you don't know what you want to do with the car, you're obviously never going to get anywhere with it. Because you're going to build it 17 times without ever knowing what you truly wanted to do with the car. And that can derail a build very, very quickly. Because if you don't know what you want to do with the car, and you don't know what you're building it for, then why are you building it? Are you building a race car? Are you building a drag car? Are you building a street car? Are you building a weekend cruiser street car? Or are you building a small tire radial street car? Like, where are we going with this? You need to have some sort of an idea of what you want to do and how you want to build the vehicle. And so that's like number one. Once you know how you want to build that vehicle, I think then from there you can proceed with the rest of your build. So with this one, I figured, it'd be super easy to LS swap this thing because there's a full kit out there. I have access to plenty of LS motors. Not a huge deal, really. I could very easily find an LS for this, buy the kit, put everything in. By the time I finished doing the research on it, it was not cheap. We were talking, by the time I did the engine, transmission, all the electronics to make it function like it should, and all the various, do's and dabs that you need to have to put these things together, it didn't make sense. It was so much money to where I could literally just put a small block with a carburetor and a turbo 350 trans for next to no money whatsoever. I could probably find a motor for $500, a trans for $500, a carb for $200 or $300, and be into the whole engine, transmission, drivetrain for, I don't know, $1,000, $1,500. But for me, I'm not a big fan of the cookie cutter stuff. Like, I understand that it works and it can be very inexpensive to do, but that's not the goal that I had for this car. I didn't want a cookie cutter vehicle. I didn't want something that everybody else had. And so when I started putting this thing together and started putting together a parts list for what I needed, the first thing that came to mind was putting a big block in this. Whether it be a 396, a 427, a 454, something of that nature. I knew that I wanted to go with an engine that a lot of people didn't have. And so I opted for the big block. I then started looking around to see what was out there for big blocks. And there's plenty of them out there. And you can get them all super cheap. Some of the older Marine 454s, you can pick those up for, you know, $500. And they might need a little bit of work, but they are functional. And you can for sure put one in. So I started looking at those. And then I started doing some more research and found out that the Gen 6 454, which was in the Chevy pickups and the Chevy Suburbans from like 96 to 99 or 2000, the engine had a much better cylinder head on it than the old Mark V 454s. It had roller cam, roller lifters, and was just overall a more reliable engine. It was originally fuel injected with port fuel injection in the later years, but had throttle body injection in the earlier years. And so it was one of those things where, like, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to build this thing for 1,000 horsepower? And the answer was no. And, you know, do I want to build it for 500, 600, 700 horsepower? No. I looked up the specs on the Gen 6 454, and there's a very, very awesome guy on YouTube named Richard Holdener, who does a lot of testing with junkyard engines and such, and the Gen 6 454 happens to be one of his favorites. And on a dyno, the engine, completely stock with nothing more than a carburetor and a set of headers, made roughly 375 horsepower and close to 500 foot-pounds in torque. And that to me was exactly what I was looking for. I don't need a car that does 300 miles an hour. I don't need a car that can run a 8-second quarter mile. I don't need any of that. What I wanted was a car that I could drive every day and have fun with. And so having a 1,000 horsepower is going to make it unreliable. And it's also not what I was looking for. So I decided to find myself a Gen 6 454, which I managed to find. I picked it up for $1,000 from a friend of a friend. Running, driving truck. I don't even think I took a look at it before I bought it. I just bought it. And so I bought that for $1,000. And then from another friend, I bought a carburetor, a Brawler 670 carburetor, which is more than enough for this particular engine in stock form. Bought that, and then was looking for a transmission. Okay, so I just checked the cluster. The dash I got for this car came out of an 87. This is an 81. I just wanted to make sure that my cluster was going to fit into the 87 dash, so it fits. It's a good thing. So I bought the 454, and then it was like, okay, I need a transmission for this thing. Now, there's several different routes that I could have gone with this. I could have gone turbo 350, turbo 400, 200 4R, 700 R4, and so it became a matter of, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go with this thing? What exactly is the plan for this car? So being that it was a street cruiser, I was like, you know what? I really want to be able to drive this thing on the street. I also want to be able to cruise down the highway with it. I would really like to have a fourth gear, an overdrive. And so I did some more research and found that behind these big blocks, they never put any sort of a 4-speed transmission other than the 480E. So there's nothing out there that was really capable of handling the torque and the power and everything that these big blocks make. Well, I decided to kind of take a shot in the dark, and I bought a used 700 R4 for $300, and I figured, you know what, for $300 I'll take my chances on it. And so I did that. Now I have to let you guys know that I did create a budget for myself, a let's just say a drivetrain budget. So I wanted to be into it for about $2,000 for the engine, transmission, and everything that goes along with it. So engine, transmission, at this point I think I'm at like $1,500 between the engine, the trans, the headers, and the carb. And everything was beautiful. So I then started collecting little parts like the intake manifold and gasket set and some valve covers and, you know, just the typical stuff when you're putting an engine in. I had to buy a flex plate for the 700R4 because the engine had a 480E flex plate on it. And started doing all that stuff and getting it all together and got the headers put on it. And what's nice about the Chevy stuff is that even though this car had a V6 in it, it still had the mounting locations for a V8. And the big block and small block mounts are identical, so I saved a bunch of money there because I could just use small block mounts. There was no kit needed to put it in the car. And so I put everything in the car. Put it in the car, turned the key, started right up, which honestly I wasn't expecting. But it fired right off, and it ran good, like really good. And so the rest of the shell was in pretty good shape, so I didn't have to really worry about too much with it. And I was able to really kind of start driving the car around. I had gotten it registered and did a few other things with it that I was hoping to do. So I got it registered, I started driving it a little bit, and I noticed that the transmission wasn't really kind of holding up to what I had wanted it to hold up to. So in comes the new budget for the drivetrain, where I'm like, okay, I really need to revamp what I'm doing here because this stuff isn't working, you know. So I then decided to go with fuel injection because I had pretty much now increased my drivetrain budget to about $5,000 because it was unreasonable for me to be able to think I could do a big block, a transmission, and drive shaft and rear end for $2,000. So I ended up, now the car's running and driving at this point, but I'm starting to gain more and more neutrals in the transmission. That 700R4 just did not like the power of the big block. So I worked out a deal with a friend of mine, and we traded off some work for a few other odds and ends, and I ended up putting a Holly Sniper on it. I got the new Sniper too. And when I put the Sniper on it, I was out tuning the car, and I did a wide open throttle pull, and then basically had 4 neutrals and drive. The car had no reverse, it had no second, third, or fourth gear. It literally had first gear, and that is it. So we cooked it. So then it was at that time where I'm like, okay, yeah, we need to increase the drivetrain budget. Now, mind you, I hadn't done anything else yet to the car. The car had the factory wheels on it. It had, God, what else did I not do to this car? It had factory wheels on it, had the cowl hood because I had to do that to fit the big block in. I hadn't done anything with the brakes, hadn't done anything with the suspension. It was just proof of concept and getting the drivetrain right first before I did anything else. So fast forward a little bit more, and I decide, okay, this thing really needs a stout drivetrain, especially if I'm going to do with it what I want to do with it. And so it basically boiled down to, okay, we're going to have to do some sort of a 4-speed automatic because I really want that. And then we are also going to have to do a very stout automatic. And the only thing that I could think of is either a Turbo 400 or the 4L80. And the unfortunate part about that is I thought the 4L80 was going to cost me $500,000 because, you know, you got to figure out some way to control it. You got to have some sort of electronic controller to get that to work. And yeah, of course, you're right. But I managed to pick up the transmission from a guy who was parting out a Chevy van. And I got the trans for $700. So that was a huge score. Known good, running and driving vehicle. Not one of the typical ran when parked deals. And then I bought the Holly controller and the harness, which was $700 or $800. And put all that stuff in. Now I had to shorten the drive shaft, and luckily I have the ability to do that here, so I did that myself. Was able to kind of get that working for myself here. And so we got all that stuff in, and I started testing the car. And now with the 4L80, everything was going good, but my rear end gear ratio was still the V6 gear ratio, which I think was a 272-to-1. And it was a non-posi, so I was literally driving around town just one tire firing at every stoplight. It was a little ridiculous. The traction was terrible. The car was super squirrely. It was all over the place. It did not like having that much power and that kind of gear. I mean, I could lay a smoke cloud for miles in first, second, third gear, but it wasn't reliable. It wasn't smart. So talked to a good friend of mine, and he had a Monty SS rear that was just hanging around. It was a 373 posi rear. And again, traded a little bit of work, got the rear end. So now we've got a good drivetrain in the car, and we've spent, God, let's see, $1,000 for the motor, $700 for the trans, $700 for the software. That's $2,400. Headers, intake manifold, Holly sniper. Yes, I mean, we're under $5,000. We're probably at about $4,500 in the drivetrain itself. And that's running and driving. That doesn't include anything else in the car. Nothing. So it's just the car, the Holly, everything running and driving, and good to go. This is coming out way faster than I thought it was. So the next step in the process was wheels and tires. I bought the wheels from a friend of mine. I had $1,000, maybe let's just say $1,500 budget for wheels and tires. Bought the wheels from a friend of mine. They were, I mean, lightly used. They maybe had 10 miles on them. Bought the wheels for $500, and then got a set of tires. Again, traded some work for the tires, so I didn't actually pay for those. Got the BF Goodrich's on there. And then from there, I decided we needed to do brakes, you know, all normal maintenance stuff. I did new rotors and calipers and pads and wheel bearings up in the front. I did all new drums and wheel bearings in the rear. So that was, I don't know, maybe $400 or $500. And then I started driving the car, like a lot. And that was at the beginning of this season. So probably March of this year, I started really driving the car. And then began noticing that the car was overheating. It was getting extremely warm all the time. And I couldn't stop it. So then I had to upgrade the cooling system. So then as far as the cooling system upgrades go, I was kind of like on the fence of what I wanted to do. I know I needed a decent radiator, you know, nice aluminum one, because this is, after all, a truck engine. So we went with cold case and a nice, their 2-row oversized aluminum radiator, and put that in. And then started driving the car again and noticed that although my temps were a ton better, the fans couldn't keep up with keeping this thing cool. Because again, we stuffed 1,000 pounds worth of cast iron big block under the hood of a G-body, which, you know, there's not a whole lot of room in, with you know, massive long tube headers and all the other stuff that creates heat buildup and whatnot is all there. So I ended up picking up a set of Spall electric fans. Those were $250 a piece, so that was another 500 bucks. And that solved the cooling issue. So we didn't have to worry about that anymore, which was a really, really good thing. So that solved all that. And so now the car is pretty much ready to go, you know, and at that point probably spent, I would say, $6,000 in total on the car. Full build, $6,000. I got tired of sitting on the vinyl bench seat that was in this thing. The car had no carpet in it, had none of that. So I started focusing on the interior, because now that the car, the drivetrain is solid, everything works, everything runs, I figure, you know what, let's focus on the interior next, because we kind of need to be comfortable while driving this car, because I wanted it to be, you know, a typical driver's car. So I found a car up in the northern part of Connecticut that had a full gray interior. This interior was cream and dark brown. It was absolutely horrific. So I found, and you can kind of see the brown on the dash here. I painted this dash. But found a complete interior for 300 bucks. Went up there, got that, had a gray bench seat, like a 70-30 bench or 55-45, whatever you call it, bench seat. Picked that up, put it in the car. Made a huge improvement in how this car operated. I got the headliner, the visors, all the gray plastics, everything. There were a few little pieces that I was missing, but nothing of any value was really missing from the interior. So at that point, for 300 bucks, I did the whole interior on the car, and it came out beautiful. Got the door panels, got everything. So really started coming together. Then I put the stereo in it, put the gauges in it, you know, a bunch of different things that I did. And it really started becoming a fun car to drive. Like, I didn't have to worry about the drivetrain anymore. Yeah, that's just about ready to come out. Didn't have to worry about the drivetrain anymore. It breaking down on me or things not working properly. And so now I could focus on making it nicer. And so I didn't really set a budget for that, because I figured, you know what? I'll find parts here and there. Things will come my way. I'll upgrade the interior as time goes on. And so that's exactly what I started doing. I found a good carpet. I put that in. I found a really nice set of seats for it. I finally got the owner to sell me the whole interior out of the 87 El Camino. So I got all the interior trim panels again, so I have extras. I got a new headliner. I got a new dash. I got the 2 seats, a new carpet, and a bunch of other stuff to go with it for 800 bucks. And it's in way better condition. I mean, you guys will see the dash when I go to put it in. It is in such good shape that just the dash alone was worth the 800 bucks that I paid for the whole interior. So I wasn't complaining about that. That was a nice haul. So that's what we're doing today, is putting that interior in. But the overall thought on all this stuff, I mean, if I were to kind of sum it up, is like, you've got to build these cars in steps, right? You know, if I had built this car and threw it together just to get it together, I'd have been upset, because in the end, this thing would have been unreliable. It would have been underpowered, overpowered, horrible handling. I mean, it's just, at what point do you say, okay, I don't want my car to be that way. I want it to be reliable. I want to go out with my girlfriend. I want to go drive for hours. I want to just end up somewhere and not have to worry about, is it going to break? Is it going to overheat? Is it going to do that? Because I'll tell you right now, the number one reason that people get rid of their project cars is because they're unreliable and they keep breaking. I've seen it so many times, especially being in this industry for as long as I have. I've seen where people are just so like, this car is garbage, I hate it, it keeps breaking. Every time I go to do something with it, it falls apart. And that's the unfortunate part about, you know, you put a car together and next thing you know, you're getting rid of it because the car's falling apart. It's not the car's fault, it's the fact that, you know, when you put it together, you didn't necessarily put it together the way that you should have. So it's kind of a hard thing. Or the second reason that people get rid of them is they sit in the garage for 30 years. Nobody ever touches them because, one, you never came up with a plan for the car. And two, you never came up with a plan for the car. So ultimately, how are you supposed to build a car when you don't know what you want to build that car for? Or what you're building it for? Are you building it to impress your friends, or are you building it for yourself? You know, are you building it to take your kids riding around? Then an El Camino is not going to be your car. So you do kind of have to plan what type of build you want to do. And once you get that planned, one of the things that I did that I felt worked great for me is I built each aspect of the car and wrote it down on a piece of paper before I actually committed to any of it. So I knew I wanted a big block. I knew I wanted a 4-speed automatic. I knew I wanted a posi rear end. I put all that stuff down on paper and said, okay, here's my build and here are the parts that I need to collect. And so, okay, what do I need to do to get this car running and driving in the course of a weekend? Well, I need to spend, you know, almost a year collecting the parts that I need so that when I do have the time to work on this car, it's not going to be a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. No, I'm going to dedicate a whole weekend. And literally in this, myself and Matt pulled the engine, the V6 out of this on a Friday. By Sunday morning, I had this car running and driving on the big block because I had everything here. Literally everything I needed was here and it was ready to go. So there was no messing around. I went from the excitement of having the car and pulling it and doing all the work and everything else to being able to back it out of my garage that Sunday morning and do a giant smoky burnout with it because I had all the parts waiting. So now for me, you know, as a 47-year-old man who doesn't have any time whatsoever, being able to spare a weekend was well within reason. I was able to take that weekend, get the car running and driving, and now I'm excited. I want to drive it. I want to get it upgraded. I want to do the things that it needs to get done. And so that's when the project really truly started. Now I have a running and driving car that I can just upgrade whenever I want to upgrade it, like we're doing today. Today we got a little bit of a lull in business. I'm going to take and put the new dash in the car so that things are a little bit better. But that's one of the key things that I think is that you need to kind of have a plan. See if we could do this with you guys watching. I think so. If I kick you, I apologize. But there is a big part of me that understands why people get rid of project cars. Because they can be a lot of work, they can be a lot of money, they can be a ton of time. But if you make the right decisions when you're doing it, they can also be very easy. And extremely rewarding, because then you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, as they say. Instead of having a car that's going to kick your ass every time you get in it. And so, like I said, there's a lot more that this car needs to be the car that I had dreamed up. But in its current state, it's great. I mean, it runs and drives phenomenally well. There's very little to be desired. I mean, I took it on a 150-mile trip last week, and it did perfectly well. Not a single hiccup. I only burned a half a tank of gas on that 150 miles, which, you know, for a 454 cubic inch big block, pretty respectable. So didn't really have to worry about it too much. It's just been an all-around good car. But you do have to make it that way. You can't just expect that it's going to be good on its own. Alright. I think we got one more bolt here-ish. So after this bolt, I think all we got to do is drop the column and the dash will come out. Disconnect some wires on the back of it. And then we're going to come in here and clean up all this wiring harness garbage that I didn't clean up previously. So guys, don't get discouraged. You know, these things are a lot of work. They do require a lot of time, especially these older cars. You know, we're talking about a car here that's 43 years old. So you're going to have some issue. And you're going to have some interesting time trying to build it. But if you plan it out and you collect all the parts you need and you get on top of it, then you're going to have a really good time with the car. And ultimately never have to worry about, is it going to be reliable enough? Is it going to go down the road? Is it going to do what I want it to do? Because it will if you build it that way. There we go. Okay. Now the dash should just pop right out of there. Yes, sir. There we go. Come on, baby. There it is. And so just like that, the dashboard comes out of the car. And now we just gotta peel these wiring harnesses out of here. Which have been in here for umpteen years. So just take your time and be careful. There we go. There's that harness. Alright, so now that the dash is out, let's kind of summarize what we got going on here. Building a project car is not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of planning, it requires a lot of time, and it also requires a lot of money. That's one of the big things that a lot of people don't realize, is that you're not going to get off cheap. It's never cheap. And if somebody says, oh, you could build a project car for cheap, don't believe them, because it's not cheap. Simply put, it is not cheap. No longer is it cheap. The fact that I found this El Camino for $700 in a junkyard is just a rare find in and of itself. I mean, you can find semi-decent clean shells now, and they want $5 grand for these things. It's ridiculous. So the best thing that you can do for yourself and your sanity is, number one, start off with a plan. Plan out what you want your car to be. Do I want it to be a driver? Do I want it to be a race car? Do I want it to be any one of those things? And then stick to that plan. If you built it like I did to be a street car, then let it remain a street car. Don't try to turn it into anything else. Buy another chassis, turn that into a race car. You're not going to win if you keep trying to do that. The second thing you need to do is plan out every aspect of the car and budget for it. Plan out the fact that you're going to need to put a drivetrain in it and budget for the drivetrain. Plan out that you're going to need to budget for the interior, budget for the suspension, budget for the brakes. If you break those things down into each individual aspect of the car, you'll be able to get them done quicker. You'll be able to spend less money because now you're sticking with one area and you're good. So my thought, what worked for me, was I got the drivetrain all settled first. The car was running and driving on a milk crate. Had no interior, no glass in it, no nothing. The secondary thing I did once I knew the drivetrain was solid was I put the glass in, I put the interior in, I worked on all that. Then, I know, a little backwards, but then I decided to deal with the brakes, wheels and tires, all that stuff. So I got all that stuff done. But each one of those things keeps adding up money-wise. And, you know, if I were to kind of give a ballpark of what I think I'm into this car for right now, it's for sure less than 10 grand. But it's not much less than 10 grand. So if you can handle 10 grand over the course of 2 years, which is how long it's taken me to get this car to this point, then you're golden. But if you try to do it all at once, you're A, either going to run out of money, or B, you're going to put together a car that you didn't spend enough money on, and it's going to fall apart. You're going to get pissed off with it, and you're going to sell it. So basically, in closing, make sure you have a well thought out plan, a well laid plan, and something that's going to get you to where you need to be with your car, that's going to make you happy and allow you to drive it and enjoy it and not just put it up on Facebook Marketplace for parts. So I'm going to leave you guys here. I'll put the new dash in and I'll take you back to finalize everything. Once the dash is in, I'll show you what it looks like. Alrighty, the dashboard is all in. Repositioned our Holly right there since none of our factory gauges work with the exception of the fuel gauge. And then we're able to put the trim ring around there, around the radio and everything. And there's the rest of the dash. So looking pretty good. If I do say so myself. You know me, I had to add that Nardi wheel for a little bit of flair. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll probably get some more videos at some point of the car, driving it, how everything works, the Holly system, all that other stuff. I'd like to get you guys a little bit more info on this thing if you're interested in it. But we'll see you on the next one. Probably another Jeep video because there's one sitting right in front of me here. But I just figured we'd take a little break, have a little chat, and, you know, go over some of the project car stuff because I know a lot of you guys are into it. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I'll see you on the next one. Have a great night.